In this episode, I'm going to talk about the vocal recording process I used for this song, as well as the orchestral programming. To begin with, choosing a vocal microphone can be a bit of a task. There are many different types of microphones out there and a virtually unlimited amount of different vocal styles and timbres. So matching a microphone with the vocalist can seem pretty arduous, but there are a few things I keep in mind which make the process easier. Finding a balance in music and sound is what I generally go after. So if I have a vocalist with a bright tone or with a lot of sibilance, I'm not going to reach for a bright microphone. Similarly, if I have a vocalist who has a gruff or a throaty tone, I won't pick a mid-range heavy microphone. Most of the time, a large diaphragm microphone is what I use to record vocals. The way the capsules handle transients, and especially in the case of tube microphones, add a flattering smoothness and depth to vocals, makes this a pretty safe starting point for microphone selection. Dynamic microphones can also work well, especially with really loud or intense vocalists, since they can handle a ton of SPL and tend to be articulate in the mid-range frequencies. Ribbon microphones, depending on the style of music and timbre of the vocalist, can also be a good fit. I find that, especially with jazz or retro-style singers, the way a ribbon responds can really bring out the earthiness and hyper-real aspects of a voice. For this song, I chose the Flea 47 large diaphragm tube condenser microphone, which I used for the mandolin as well. This mic has a very full, rich sound, plenty of low end, and a relatively extended top end, which makes it great for dense productions, as the vocal has more than enough information to either cut through or sit on top of the mix depending on the way you equalize it. I used my Amec Neve channel-in-a-box preamp, which I've owned for over 10 years, and which has definitely made its way onto many of my productions. It does have a characteristic Neve mid-range bump, which again helps to keep word clarity in a big mix like this. I rolled off the low end on the way in around 80 Hz, which I do on all of my vocals in order to stop unwanted rumbling and low-end information from getting into the vocal tracks. That can really start to add up, especially when you do several vocal tracks as I did in this song. So in order to not have to worry about that later, I just filter it out on the way in. I also compress the vocal pretty liberally, in this case between 6 and 10 dB of compression on the Amec. I find the Amec compressor to be transparent and super easy to use, so I usually keep my vocal compression somewhere in this range in order to smooth things out during the tracking process. With the plethora of great EQ and compression plugins available, you might choose to forgo that on the way in, but since I've found these steps to be something I always end up taking eventually, I save myself the time and just take care of it at the outset. Now, as you can see here, I have most of the vocal tracks trimmed to leave out empty space. This is useful because if you have a bunch of audio tracks like this, even if there's no audio on the track, your hard drive will still keep accessing the file. So that means more work for the drive and slower drive speeds because of it. So it's a good habit to get rid of those large empty parts of your tracks. Also, it makes for easier visual identification of which tracks are which from a zoomed out view like this. So it's easier to see what's in your project and what's coming up as the song plays through. You'll notice all these files here end with the word mellow, which is short for Melodyne. That's the pitch correction and vocal editing software I use. It's a very full-featured, complex piece of software, so I won't get into the inner workings here. But as far as pitch correction goes, it's hands down my favorite software to use for vocal editing. I will mention one cool way to use it, which is to create harmony ideas. For the majority of this song, Bethany's singing a continuous harmony along with me. And in order to come up with some of the notes, I simply took my vocal track into Melodyne and then duplicated that track. Then, while the song plays, I move the duplicate track around to hear what all the different interval combinations could sound like.
We didn't sign our lives away.
Once I hone in on the parts I want, I just export that into my project and use it as a guide track to learn and then sing properly. Regardless of how good your ear is, working this way will definitely lead you to find new and pattern-breaking harmony combinations that can add serious harmonic depth to your songs. Moving on, I want to talk a bit about the orchestral programming in this song. It goes without saying that orchestral composition is a world unto itself, and there's an endless amount of learning to be done in regards to how an orchestra works and how each individual element has its role within the grand scheme of the whole. For a pop production like this, I knew I wanted the orchestra to be grandiose, lush, and emotional. So having a basic understanding of the articulations and possibilities of each part of the orchestra helps a lot. Using samples is a great way to both learn those details and to add another dimension to your track. For this song, I use 2 different orchestral sample sets, Berlin Strings by Orchestral Tools and Hollywood Strings by East West. I find that combining different orchestral sample sets can really add some tonal complexity, and one thing you'll find when trying different sets is that, for the most part, each and every one has its own strengths and weaknesses. So it's important to spend some time with them and learn the ins and outs, as they really are almost individual musical instruments in their own right. In this particular example, the Berlin Strings are a smaller ensemble compared to Hollywood Strings, so I chose to have the smaller ensemble playing the staccato, spiccato, and sforzando parts, which are the shorter, kind of more biting articulations, and have the larger ensemble Hollywood Strings play the drawn-out legato parts to create a really thick, lush bed underneath the shorter articulations. Now, this is just my personal creative preference here, but the point is that if you want to spend some time and plan out your approach, there's a lot of sonic diversity to be found and explored. And another point to note is if you look closely at the MIDI data here, you'll see that the notes are not quantized exactly. Strings generally take at least several milliseconds to create what we perceive as the start of the note, quote unquote. And depending on the way they're played, it can take much longer than that. So if you quantize them 100%, they'll usually feel consistently late or behind the beat. So it's important to really play them along with the track and use your ears to make sure they're performed in a timely manner rather than using your eyes to line them up to a grid. Also, both of these sample sets provide multiple microphone setups, which range from close mic positions all the way back to very ambient mic setups. So playing with a balance between the various mics can result in either a very intimate close sound to a conductor perspective, and all the way back to a distant audience perspective. In order to make the strings cut through this dense part of the song, I used a combination of all the mic setups, leaning a bit more towards the close mics in order to make sure the immediacy of the bow attacks are heard through the mix. While this may all seem to be a lot of information to keep track of, having access to all of this inside your computer makes experimenting both a necessity and a breeze. It's really fun and informative to spend a good bit of time playing around with different string arrangements and ensembles and articulations in order to find just the right performance to enhance the song I'm working on. And the great thing is that once you hone in on what you want, you can save those performances, open up a few more tracks, and play around with some other possibilities without racking up a bunch of expenses keeping a live orchestra on the clock while you see what else could work. So that wraps up this video about vocal recording and orchestral programming. Next, we'll take a look at the effects selection and how I used them.